Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Lost City of Ithos, Mage Errant Book 4, Chapters 11 through 15, Here Be Serpents, Destructive Resonance, Hiding, The Listener in the Silent Straits, and First Sight. In these chapters, we battle some serpents, which are real fucking troublemakers. Talia loses her hair. Tragic. And we go through a real weird area where nobody can talk or use magic, and it's genuinely extremely tense. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. What's up, Dan? Had a little bit of a break in there where I wasn't able to schedule any episodes, but we are back, and I don't think there's going to be a break for a little while. And I am really looking forward to getting back into this world. I went and re-listened to chapters 9 and 10 just to sort of refresh myself before starting on chapter 11. And I had forgotten, I think I listened to chapter 11 like a month ago, because once I started it, I was like, oh, no, I did this section already. But I hadn't. I had just listened to it and like thought really hard about probably what I would say if I had recorded on it already. So this started above deck. So we end chapter 10 knowing we're in some serious trouble. We don't know the nature of this trouble. And then when we start 11, we aren't plunged into the trouble right away. Well, we are. It's a different kind of trouble. We're talking about Sabe's flirtation and love life. And she is realizing that that shit is a lot easier to direct from the outside than it is to actually do. Yeah, girl. Word. I really, like, there is nothing quite as validating as finding out that a person who acted like something wasn't a big deal can't do it. Not even necessarily can't, but isn't as good at it as they thought. You know, this recently I saw a post on Facebook, and it was a dude who was like 55 or so, and he wound up, like, the company he worked for a really long time was laying him off, and he was posting about how he now had a greater understanding of what it is that millennials are complaining about with the job market, because he could not believe how impossible it was to get any sort of callback about applications and resumes that he sent in. He's like, they used to send you a message letting you know that they weren't interested. They don't do that now. They just don't answer you. Or I would say go into places and just drop your resume off. They don't take them. They don't want you to do that. They tell you to fill it out online, and then you fill it out, and then you find out that they want you to also attach your resume. Well, I would have just done that and not filled out the whole thing with the same exact information. The benefits suck. The pay sucks. The hours suck. I'm really sorry, but I didn't believe you. Everything you're saying is true. And you know, like, the thing about this that's so frustrating, and not to say that Sabe was in this ballpark exactly and in being as egregious, you know, but it's a similar thing to like the article that circulated a while back of man accidentally replies to clients from female coworkers' email address and suddenly gets a lot more combative clients than he's ever gotten and realizes why. Sometimes you just should listen to people. It shouldn't take you having to be put in a position for you to believe what someone's saying. There's a difference between I have a greater appreciation for the meaning of what you were telling me now that I've experienced it. And I straight up didn't believe you until I went through it too. So again, I'm not trying to lay all of that as a base fee. It's not that bad. But I do appreciate her thinking about how she had wondered about interfering more with what's going on with Talia and Hugh. Not that Hugh knows there's anything going on with them. And the fact that she is feeling a little sensitive about how her and all of her friends were manipulated has made her stay her hand, because she doesn't like the feeling of being managed. And she's realizing, like, maybe that's shitty. Maybe that's not the person that I want to be. And I really appreciate that from her, because if you are kind of a control freak, and she clearly falls more in that category, she's kind of like me, it's very tempting to want to, like, handle everything. But that's not what life's about. You got to let your friends live their own lives. And if they fuck up, they fuck up. You know, that's their issue. So this dude, all he did was ask what she wants, what she likes to do for fun. And she doesn't have an answer. And the, like, moment stretches on until it's almost awkward, because the answers that she thinks of giving about, you know, like the things that she likes to do, they sound kind of weird. It says, a lot of potential answers came to mind. The problem was she doubted that Dell would be interested if she said she enjoyed studying magic, even though that was true. She'd sound insane if she said she enjoyed getting involved in the deadly politics played between great powers. Hanging out with her friends just sounded too boring. And honestly, this is a very reasonable thing to sort of get stuck on. Like, if you ask me, what do you do for fun? My answers are probably going to be like playing Animal Crossing, cooking, watching television. Does it sound boring? Maybe. Is it true though? Yeah. So, like, I get wanting to sound more interesting, but also maybe just, like, be who you are. And if he thinks that you're boring, then you can just sort of write him off. It's fine. This is something I wish that I had clocked a lot earlier in my life, that I didn't need to pretend to be interested in things that I wasn't, because it just brings a headache later when you realize that now that you've said that you like XYZ, there is an expectation that you're going to want to participate in XYZ, and you actually kind of don't want to. So now what? Now you're stuck, because that was part of how you sold yourself to your partner, was being like, oh yeah, no, I really love that. I would love to go with you to that sporting event, that concert, that a convention. And now you got yourself in a fucking situation. So we'll see how she does with that, but we don't really circle back to this in these chapters. So in the midst of this, like, long, drawn out, awkward pause, there is an attack by sea serpents, and her life is saved by Talia. And what is so funny is that when we go to Talia's POV, we find out that she was so quick on the draw with her magic because she basically had already started to cock her pistol in what's honestly a kind of problematic. She's over here hating the Rawdon youths, and especially the young ladies, because she has so much jealousy. So she's got this in her head, and she's like getting herself so worked up that her magic is like on deck kind of already, despite the fact that she doesn't actually intend to do anything. She's got herself geared up. And the way that I thought of this was like when you imagine having an argument with somebody that you aren't actually having, And so when a thing pops off, you already have things ready that you're about to say because you've gone over this hypothetical argument in your head so many times. And this thing, it's so weird. Despite the name, they weren't snakes at all, nor reptiles, nor dragonkin, but fish. They possessed strange lobe-shaped fins that they could move in any direction, which along their sinuous snake-like bodies gave them unparalleled agility in the water. And though they weren't snakes, they were just as good at climbing as snakes were, and had a nasty habit of climbing silently up the sides of ships and snatching sailors off the decks. I don't think so, my friends. Nah, count me out. I'm good. I'm not even somebody who has a particular issue with snakes. You know, some people have a real, like, they're really frightened of them. I find snakes puzzling. They're weird. You know, they're just weird creatures. I think they can be actually rather pretty. I have actually a fair amount of jewelry with snakes in them. Motifs. Check these out. I'll show this to Dan since he's here in the chat. See these, Dan? They're pretty dope, right? It's the head of a snake goes in front of my ear, and then the tail that hangs back. So I'm actually like, snakes are kind of cool. Anytime you have a snake that can like sneak up behind you, I'm just gonna no. If I can look down at a snake that's on the ground, not intimidated. It's down there. I'm not down there. My feet are down there, kind of, but I can take those away real quick, real easy. They're climbing up the fucking side of the ship behind you? Why? For what reason? To eat you? Oh, Nope. So Talia takes care of this guy. He turns into a bunch of wooden coins. Very weird. And the second one grabs this dude, Del, and pulls him over the side. And Sabe launches herself into the water after him. And this is a real, like, situation because, you know, Sabe has her, like, water abilities and whatnot. But she winds up going, like, deep enough and things get to a point. She's thinking about the bends. She doesn't call it that, but it's obviously, like, the same thing where if you surface too quickly, you wind up causing, like, I think the bends, you get, like, little oxygen bubbles in your blood, if I'm not mistaken, that kill you in a really painful, awful way. I was sort of fascinated by the concept of the bends when I was a kid because I was convinced, as so many of us were for whatever reason, that I was going to go into marine biology. So I thought, like, oh, I'm going to have to know this stuff. So Talia, who is still on deck when Sabe goes down, is trying to get all of these Radan who have water affinities to, like, sense her in the water, and they're not picking anything up. While Sabe could propel herself by detonating her water armor around her limbs, she had been practicing a rather different method of swimming locomotion. It had taken direct intercession by a Lustan to get her the chance to practice it in the great water holding tanks below Skyhold. But given that the water wasn't purified until it was to be pumped upwards to the top of the mountain, where it would then travel downward through pipes, getting it dirty hadn't really been a concern. So she goes down and she sees all of these juvenile serpents that are, like, at rest, kind of. And she starts to realize, like, oh, these things could do some real damage. And I also don't want them to get riled up with the people, like, above me. And they begin to chase her. And she's using her water to push them off her, etc., as she's attempting to lunge for Del. Then, on the deck of the ship, Hugh comes out, is, like, asking where Sabe is. I'm not going to go through all of this because I tend to fall behind, but long story short, Hugh winds up saving Sabe, and I really enjoy her hugging him and being like, you have got to stop talking shit about yourself, because I have literally lost count of the number of times that you have saved my life. And he starts to be like, well, you saved my, and she's just like, oh my God, that's not the point. You have saved my life. Who cares about the score? Like, he's clearly kind of mentally keeping score. And I understand that. This is the thing, you know, keeping score is like, it's not a super healthy thing to do, but there is a part of me that feels like, depending on the person you're dealing with, it is kind of necessary. It's not necessary in this situation. You got to let it go. Stop it. She's struggling with lack of air, and her armor collapses, and Dell is hurtling skyward. Below her, the surface erupted in a spray as the sea serpent launched itself into the air, its jaws agape. She reached the pinnacle of her ascent and began to fall straight downward toward the serpent. And then Hugh grabs her, and she's floating in midair, and he saves her life. It's great. Good for you, Hugh. So at this point, she looks up, and there are two Radhan, a girl and a boy. The girl says, you saved my brother. The boy said, you're amazing. And they come over and kiss her on the cheek, and she's just kind of taken aback. It's not specified. I think Dell was the one she had been talking to, but I'm not positive. So we'll see if she winds up reconnecting at any point, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know. We'll see. So there's this moment where Alustin is like talking to her about, because she is asking if she can potentially help with Talia because she has a head injury. And Alustin gives her a look and says, what have your healing instructors told you about head wounds? And Sabe says, don't do anything until you're a fully trained healer. You're more likely to hurt the patient than help. And he seems pleased with this response. I don't know. The fact that this is being brought up now makes me sort of wonder if we're going to see an issue where she's going to need to handle a head injury in the future somehow. And it turns out that Talia has some pieces of metal wedged into her scalp. And what happened? First of all, she had too many enchanted items on her person. She had 5 of these needles that can turn into lockpicks, hairpins, not needles, in her hair. She also had 2 enchanted daggers and the magic needles in the back of her shoes. So in total, she had 9. And then she was standing next to Hugh's book, which, reminder, ate the communication tablet thing that he had been given by Kandaron. So there's already a warning about carrying too many enchanted items. But she says, you told me they could interfere with each other's function, not that they would just randomly explode. And Alustin said, well, exploding is extreme. In this case, it was most likely triggered by a large number of enchanted items in proximity to Hugh's spellbook suffering gastric distress. If it set off a cascading resonance between your enchanted items. And I really enjoy, first of all, that this spellbook has really made an enemy out of Talia. After dragging her down the hall by her hair, it has now inadvertently been the cause for her to lose all of her hair. I'm honestly, Team Talia on this one book. I'm sorry, you're super useful and everything, but none of this had to go this way. You could have just not eaten that fucking thing. You could have just not been jealous of a book, but you were, and you ruined it. You ruined it. Secondly, though, I really appreciate this explanation of not having a limit on how many magical items you can carry, because this is the danger when you have a universe where enchanted objects are very common and very high powered. And when I say high powered, I mean they can do very very helpful specific things, it becomes sort of a plot hole sometimes where something happens and a person will remember a thing that was in like a book 2 books back that you wrote about that could have been used, this like enchanted object. All they had to do was get another one of those. And then this whole thing here could have been sidestepped and would never have happened. This is the problem with like J.K. Rowling creating the Time Turners. She then had to have a book where all of the Time Turners were destroyed because she realized she had put herself into a corner where how can I have anything matter if I've got a bunch of fucking Time Turner things out there that can just undo it all? You've got to get rid of them. Which, by the way, then we wound up with fucking Cursed Child, which was just a cursed script. And it turned out not all the Time Turners were actually... Whatever. It was the worst. So bad, you guys. But yeah, so if you have this kind of rule, it really helps to be like, well, you know, we couldn't carry everything we could possibly need for safety reasons. It's like a commonly understood fact that this is a dangerous thing to do. You need to put limits on things or else it starts to get a little bit, it can almost feel like a video game. Like I'll just pull a thing out of my pocket and now this won't be an issue anymore. And it can't be that easy. So, Dan says, or the Deathly Hallows, stupid Deus Ex Machina. Oh, Miss T says, cough, Marvel Time Stone cough. Yeah. It becomes a little Doctor Who. Look, this is, for those who aren't aware, I covered Doctor Who for a podcast with a co-host, and I was the unspoiled one. That show really did not do anything for me. It was like a very frustrating experience because it would have highs that I was like, see, this is all the potential that's here. We're just waiting for somebody to tap it. And then like 2 episodes later, it would hit the lowest low. And I would be like, what are you doing? So if you're interested in hearing me get really angry up to like the 8th Doctor, I think we got before I finally quit, go ahead and find that. But you've been warned. I found very little to like. It was not for me. I think it's a lot of nostalgia is why people are super attached to it. It has its like little moments. It's got its moments. They're few and far between, in my opinion. Okay, I'm done. I'm done talking about Doctor Who. Look at what you did, Miss T. You brought it up. And there was something else that you brought up that I had to put a time limit on myself to talk about. I feel like I can't remember if it was Star Wars. Might have been Star Wars. Probably it was Star Wars. Okay. So she mentions to Alustin their theories about him being Helicotin, and he says that he doesn't like to talk about it, but he is. And then, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to cut your hair off entirely, which is a hell of a distractor. Like, if he wants her to never ask him about being Helicotin again, saying, I'm sorry, I have to cut off all of your hair right after admitting that you are, that is going to do it. She's not going to be paying attention to your fucking lineage anymore. So, this whole thing. Alustin waited for a moment to make sure Arthur was keeping her still, and then the spell-formed glyphs on the paper lit up. With a slow, smooth, cautious motion, he guided the paper over Talia's head, the paper slicing through Talia's hair less than a finger width from her scalp. As it moved, the paper's shape perfectly shifted to curve around and keep an even distance from Talia's scalp. The paper's edge sliced through Talia's hair like it were just an illusion, which was pretty alarming given how thick it was. Hugh doubted a sword could chop through her hair so easily. He knew for a fact scissors had trouble with it from Talia's many complaints on the matter. The burnt remains of Talia's hair slumped to the ground, mixing in with the scattered wooden coins. And Hugh later sees the same piece of paper slicing into the railing, the wooden railing, and is like, oh damn, that shit's even sharper than I expected. So, this, I hate this for her. I have big, bold hair. Not at the moment of this recording. You can tell that I do, kind of, but it's being kept under strictures at the moment. But it is kind of a part of my whole look and identity, you know, my hair. And I went through a period when I was I was a sophomore in college, and I cut it off. I cut it at about an inch off my scalp. And I just was so sick of it, which makes sense because I was coming off the 90s where big hair was the absolute opposite of what you wanted. So I had done so much trying to like straighten it, trying to manage it. And I just got fucking fed up. And, you know, I was young and slender and had this like face that I would do up with makeup. And so the extremely short hair look really worked for me in a way that these days I don't feel like it would. I've thought about it because I occasionally do get very fed up with my hair. And I'm just like, nah, I can't do it. But I understand how odd it is to be that attached to a part of your appearance and then suddenly have it be gone. And it's a simultaneous, like, just the change itself is weird. And realizing how important it was to you when it was also something you complained about all the time. That is also a weird thing. So I really felt Talia when later she's like, I know I complained about it all the time, but I liked it and now I don't have it and this sucks. I really, really understand. And I appreciate that Godric is like, look, girl, it's a change. No doubt about it. But I'm going to remind you that you are covered in these like wild tattoos. And with your hair gone, you look pretty fucking badass, actually. And that comforts her a whole lot. At first she's like, you're just saying that to make me feel better. But he's clearly not. And, you know, of course, she's a little bit concerned about Hugh's, like, reaction to her appearance. And we haven't been in his head. Like, we only get this moment here where he sees it being cut off. And the thing that he thinks is that she looks oddly vulnerable without her hair, and then notices that some of her tattoos were broken by like the cuts, and gets concerned about that. But there's no real mention of like whether he thinks she's more or less attractive necessarily. And I've got to be honest, you guys. The fact that he hasn't even considered her attraction, not her attractiveness. That's the word I want. I'm not sure he's like, what Godric says later is, I doubt Hugh has even let himself think that was a possibility, which is probably true. That's probably really what's at the root of this. But there was a big part of me that felt like if it hasn't even entered his head, I don't know if it's there, you know, because that's the sort of thing that'll sneak in whether you really think there's a chance with somebody or not. We'll see. But we have this lovely moment where he sits with Talia and he remembers her just like coming and sitting with him that one time when he just needed support and not saying anything, but just the fact that she was there was so helpful. And he's trying to think of ways to solve her problem and he can't think of anything, but then he realizes maybe that's not what she even needs. And he just comes and holds her hand and sits with her until one of the healers comes and like tells her to go and lay down. So I love this moment. When he looked back to the others, Godric was giving him an odd look. What's that look? He asked Godric. Godric just shook his head. You're a good friend is all. And I'm like, You were sussing out whether any of that was like him being interested, I think. I think that's what's going on. So Captain Greffa then comes up. She attempts to apologize to all of them for not having a proper serpent watch set up. But apparently this is like, they're close enough to a territory and they're in a particular season where this really should not have been a concern. And everybody insists that she has nothing to apologize for. But I'm sort of wondering if this isn't something that she should have expected. Maybe they were sent. Maybe this was like a targeted attack somehow. I do love when she tries to continue. Alustin just does a to shut her up. Alustin, you're so disrespectful. And she says that they have 2 dead, 1 missing, almost certainly dead, 3 badly wounded, a few lesser wounds. And she asks about Sabé and is like, she saved somebody who was pulled under, and that usually once they're under, that's it. They're not coming back up. Who was that? And when Alustin says that she's a Cain Das, she's like, you're fucking with me. And he's like, no, she's Elenia's granddaughter. And then he mentions something about Hugh. I'll get in touch with Kandarin to see what she has to say. And the captain's eyes are like, Kandarin? What the fuck? We got a lot of big players with these kids, huh? So then we have this moment here. Greffa says, here it is. I haven't heard any rumors of the listener stirring of late, so it might be feasible. I'll check with Kandarin on that as well. He's talking about, because she asks him to scry the Silent Straits. And this is the first mention, I think, that we get of the Silent Straits, which we don't get an adequate explanation, in my opinion, of what these really are. But, okay. Arthur leaned down and picked up a wooden coin. Some kind of wingless dragon on one side and a chamber pot on the other. Godric picks one up. A smiling guy on one side and the same guy frowning on the other. Hugh, I found at least 3 bees, a fire-breathing goat, a sandrake, and a pile of books. Alustin has a sea serpent on one and a pigeon on the other side. I just wanted to mention this because I feel like this is going to turn out to be relevant somehow. I don't know how, but I just want it to have been mentioned. So that's why I told you each and every one. So, okay. We have then the conversation with Talia and her friends about her hair, about them each like feeling frustrated and a little useless, especially Godric. There's the argument about whether ice is a rock. And let's see. You've seen me drag Hugh out of his rooms. Do you think I won't do the same for you too? Hugh's not going to be attracted to this. I doubt he'll even want to look at me. Godric rolled his eyes at her. Who exactly was it that sat holding your hand to comfort you for a half hour just now? That's different, Talia said in a tiny voice. I mean, it is different, Talia, but like in a way that's better. You know that, right? And they ask, how would this work in one of your novels? And I love this. What would the characters do? Repeatedly try and fail to work up the nerve to confess their feelings to their love interest over and over again, with lots of amusing accidents and misunderstandings between them that make things seem impossible, only to find their courage during the final battle. First off, you are absolutely not going to confess your feelings to Hugh during a battle. That's a good way to get both of you distracted and killed. But I've got to agree with Sabé on this one, Godric said. That's a terrible idea. Talia sniffed but nodded. Second, that sounds like it would be absolutely exhausting and annoying for everyone involved, especially me and Godric. So what then? Do you think you could actually just, work up your nerve and tell Hugh how you feel? We're on this whole expedition with the future of the continent at stake, Godric said. I think it might help if you just get it over with one way or another so you can keep focused on the mission. Talia eyed him oddly. Isn't the usual advice here to avoid complicating things altogether when you're in the middle of a crisis like this? Godric shrugged. Do you seriously see us ever not being in the middle of some kind of crisis or another? Sabé chuckled at that, and even Talia snorted in amusement. I really do enjoy that a lot, because that is exactly the thing. And it's the sort of thing that, like, you can know that that's a trope, and you can even appreciate the trope as it's playing out because you know that there's a comfort in that, But man, it is tiring. And it's a frustrating thing. There's a whole, you guys know, like, Pam and Jim in The Office were a big will they, won't they couple. And it wound up that when the two of them got together, it kind of ruined things. Like, because so much of the tension in the show that was fun to watch was these two being in love and not being willing to admit it to each other or even themselves for a while. So to a degree, that back and forth will they, won't they thing can be like really valuable and you want to hold on to it for as long as possible. But honestly, that's really only true in stories that feel like there aren't other stakes to be worried about. In this kind of story, there's plenty of other things for me to be concerned with. I don't need a boring back and forth will they, won't they. I don't need it. And frankly, and this is something that I talked about with Rashawn because we're covering the Raybearer books. There is something to be said for subverting the trope where people aren't sure of each other and instead cementing the fact that these people can rely on each other and depend on each other and be supportive of one another so that you can allow other parts of the story to be the uncertain, tense, and unpredictable plot line. And it feels like it gives you more room in that respect because you already know where the characters sit with each other. So I personally, while I understand the value of that trope, and there are times where I'm like, okay, Abbott Elementary is doing a kind of Pam and Jim thing right now. I'm just, fine. It's with what it is, it's fine. But in this sort of story where we have people fighting for their actual lives and needing to trust one another to have their back in life or death situations, I don't want to worry about interpersonal drama. I don't. It's not to say it can't be done in a way that is effective and works for me at all, but I don't want that in the traditional way that I can sometimes expect from YA. So we have the next day, we have Alustin explaining to all of them there are 4 rules for traveling through the Silent Straits. First, your ship must not be built of cedar, and you must be carrying as little as possible on board. Second, you must use as little magic as possible. Third, you do not stare toward the domain of the listener for sustained periods. Quick glances and panoramic sweeps of the mountains are fine, but no staring. And fourth, and most importantly, you must not speak. No casual greetings, no muffled curse words, nothing. It is called the listener for a reason. The silent straits are called such not because they are silent, but because you need to be silent to pass through it safely. The listener's domain isn't currently blooming, so we shouldn't attract its interest if everyone obeys the rules, most especially the fourth. No matter what you do, stay silent. And Hugh is like, well, can't I create a noise ward? And Alestin's like, what did I say about magic? And he's like, use as little as possible. Using small amounts is safe, but we'll be restricting that to the ship's mages. Our concern isn't noise, it's spoken words, which I thought was really interesting. The listener doesn't pay attention to non-speech sounds like footsteps, the creaking of the ship, coughing. Unusually loud noises sometimes cause it to stir, but a full ship noise ward would draw its attention far more swiftly. If you don't think you can follow these rules, the ship's healer has prepared sleeping drafts so you can sleep through the transit. All of the young children on board will be taking it, as well as several of the more gossipy crew members. That would be me. If I were on this ship, I would be the one everybody would look at and point at and be like, you got to get her to take it. There's just no way, kids. Not happening. I'm not keeping my mouth shut. It's not going to happen. Not going to work out. So yeah, knock me out. And Archer says he wants to take it because he has no intention to ever be awake for another transit through the Silent Straits again. So he has seen some shit, apparently. What is the listener? Talia asked. Alestin shrugged. I have no idea. I suspect Kandarin might know, but she's never told me what the listener is, save that she believes its borders to be stable and unlikely to expand anytime soon. Galvatron likely knows what it is as well, though he's never admitted as much in any of his writings. What I do know is the listener is a strong contender for the single mightiest great power on the continent. It's laid waste to countless fleets, dragon flights, and great powers. The only real rival it has is the Sleeper in the Sand, a giant sun maw the size of a town. It's buried under the sand of the western Endless Erg somewhere. For so far as we can tell, it's essentially unkillable and could probably devour Indris in a few bites. Remember how difficult it was to hit the normal sun maw we faced with spells? The Sleeper's mana disruption field extends hundreds of feet away from its body. It's older than human civilization on Anastas, and has been imprisoned and kept asleep beneath the sands for over a millennium. It tries to awaken every century or two. No, absolutely not. Once again, I don't want snakes that climb over the sides of ships. I don't want giant unknowable beings asleep in sand that are impossible to kill and can only be like put into a stasis, basically. I hate this. And I hate the listener, which is like, the whole thing is so creepy. And he says it's not in bloom now. What does that mean? Nobody asks. In bloom, so what if it were? Do you mean literally? Like there are flowers blooming? Are you saying like it's winter and so it can't hear as well? Or why is it more likely to wake up when it's in bloom? What are you talking about? Nobody's asking the questions they need to ask. He winds up bringing this up later, but I really want to point out, you know? And Sabé, thankfully, look, I'm not even saying that she asks, because she doesn't. He asks for them to repeat the rules, and she says, your ship mustn't be built of cedar. That's a really weird rule. I want you to please ask why. Don't just say it's weird. Yeah, it is. We all know it's weird. Ask why, though. Normally, the domain is an ugly, dusty gray brown. When it blooms, the huge patches of yellow, red, and orange appear. When they're dense and wide enough, it is absolutely unsafe to venture anywhere near. It's guaranteed death to do so, even more surely than if you break the 4 rules. But it just patches, like, appear? Color just appears? Like, what does that mean, though? And why is it death to pass? And why is speaking a problem either? Like, you know, and Archer says, like, it's a gruesome death. What does that mean? Y'all are just nobody's asking the questions I need asked. He doesn't say flowers of certain colors grow. He just says patches appear. Like, what? Does the sand just change color? Like, what do you mean? Anyway, okay. It's the fastest route by far. And it's safer in some regards. You won't find kraken, sea serpents, or anything else. Even in the depths of winter, when the serpents come closest to the shore, they avoid the straits. That's a big part of why we're taking this route. The southern route through the islands are more dangerous when serpent infested. And this is when Archer brings up that the serpents came a lot closer than they normally do. And I'm like, yeah, something's up with that. We've got another few hours before we reach the straits. Once we're there, the actual trip through the dangerous section where the strait is narrowest should only take 4 to 6 hours, depending on how much the winds want to cooperate. Decide soon whether you want to sleep or not. So, you know, I said that you'd have to put me to sleep because I wouldn't be able to shut the fuck up. I take it back. If I were given a project, I could definitely keep my mouth shut. Give me a book, give me my Switch, and have some Animal Crossing ready, an audiobook on my AirPods. I can go without speaking to anybody all day. I could do that. But I don't see that being available on the ship. And I do appreciate Hugh saying it wasn't often you had daylight hours where you were guaranteed that nobody would try and start a conversation with you. Blessed be the introverts. So, Archer had told them how the Shattered Isles had once been part of the Skyreach Range in eons past, when the world was colder and the seas were lower. The summer heat's grip on the sea air struggled against the fierce winds that blew from the mountains on either side of them. To the south, the Shattered Isles loomed far bigger than the mountains Hugh had known in Emblem. And there's a description here of, you know, like the beaches and the forests and all of these like fish that can be seen and seals on cliffs waiting for the water to rise again. And it's like a very beautiful like isolated from what's around it. But there is then the domain. He hadn't known what exactly he'd been expecting. Mysterious structures, bizarre growths, maybe shadowy movement, twisted demonic wildflowers for the bloom Celestin had spoken of, perhaps. The listener's domain, however, contained none of that. Instead, the great mountains of the southern edge of the Skyreach Range seemed to be covered in a dull gray-brown blanket. Not a tightly woven, well-made blanket, but a loose, fuzzy, dusty mass slumping over boulders and cliffs, covering everything, even the peaks that would normally be bare far above the tree line. Great streaks of vivid yellow, angry chains of red specks, and misshapen rosettes of orange were all scattered about the blanket, but other than their garish colors, seemed no different than the rest of the surface. A gently shifting haze of dust seemed to drift above the cloying blanket that was the listener's domain. What is it? And he realized that, like, he had been thinking his instructions to not look too hard, not stare, that it was the kind of thing he was going to need to monitor himself, because it wasn't like that's a kind of unspecific thing. Don't stare, you can glance. Glance means a different thing to different people. That's a very subjective sort of. So he's thinking that he's going to need to just sort of, like, you know, watch himself. But then he realizes that when he looks at it, there's this, like, stomach churning thing that happens that seems to suck him in and almost pull on his heartbeat, like the beat stutters. So it actually is something that happens to you. What the fuck, though? What is that? I don't like this at all. Ugh. Nope, 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 nope. For all the noise of the wind and birds, of leaping fish and irritable seals, even the creaking ship itself, the human silence was shockingly oppressive. Hugh could feel it weighing on him like silence had never done before. The fear and nervousness of the crew combined with the horrible, unmistakable feeling of being watched, as though the listener knew perfectly well they were on its doorstep, yet simply had no reason to care yet. Hugh kept waiting for some sort of crisis to occur. A broken mast, a sailor overboard, something. But the ship just kept plowing through the choppy seas, and the silence beat against them all constantly. And what this reminded me of was, I don't know how many of you guys will have watched this movie, but there's a movie called Persona. And it is an old black and white film about two women who wind up, like, staying together, one of whom is a woman who refuses to speak, and another is the nurse who is supposed to take care of her. And it's the story of how this woman, absolutely refusing to speak, begins to drive the nurse insane, because it's not that she doesn't have the ability to speak. It is simply for unknown reasons that she will not do it. And so the nurse starts to kind of lose her mind, because it feels to her like she's being kind of taunted, even though that's very much her sort of putting that on the woman, and she's reading into things that aren't necessarily there. And this sort of reminded me of that, how, like, the silence itself becomes like a being in the room, and feels like a whole other presence, you know? And once they get out of it, people it takes a long time before anybody is willing to speak, even when it's clearly safe to do. Hugh cast one final glance backward as they rounded a curve in the strait. There, halfway up a mountain, rested a great cancerous splotch of bloom, the reds and oranges and yellows following a winding curve that looked like nothing so much as a great malformed eye. It's giving Sauron. But yeah, so they pass out of there, thank God. Then we go into chapter 15. The crew collapsed into their bunks as though they hadn't slept in days. It was only mid-afternoon, but Hugh slept well into the next morning, far after he normally would have risen. And I think that's a really interesting thing. It's one thing to say it felt oppressive, everything was weighing on them in a, psychological sense. This is a physical sense. Everybody is actually exhausted, which makes me think something was being pulled from them somehow while they were traveling through. And I am not a fan of that theory or idea. So, yeah. And Hugh has this moment where he's like thinking about Ava and whether she's traveled through, and if she has, would she have told them about it? And he wonders why he's thinking about her. And it said, Hugh felt overwhelmed with new memories, as though the events of recent days were trying to force others out of his mind. I'm just saying, something about Silent Straits is fucking with his head. That's not an accident. Okay? I don't like it at all. This is very creepy. Extremely creepy. Ugh. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it so much. Like, something that vast, that powerful, that unknown. It's a weird thing that nobody knows what it is, but they sure know the rules. Why? How did they find out the rules? What is it about? Like, did people just fucking, go ahead and travel without knowing, and by virtue of failed experiments realize that, oh, the guys who didn't speak, those are the ones who got through? I mean, that sucks. How did they figure this out? And the cedar ship, but for why? What is that? Oh my God. It's not a moth, is it? Is it a giant moth? Because, they use cedar to like keep moths away. And moths are patterned in a way that could be, and they have things on them that look like eyes that are part of a pattern but aren't eyes. I'm just picturing something that's like really awful to me, and I hate moths so much. So I'm putting it into a moth. That's my mental picture now. A giant moth draped over the mountains. I don't like this thing, though. And it's clearly like drawing on the people who pass through. And I'm wondering if it's like the speech, if that gives it a hook into you that is impossible to get out again. Like a fish taking bait. It's very creepy. Okay, so they reach the potential site for Ithos, and they are, let's see, all the physical training Alustin and Archer had put the four of them through the past 2 years was coming in handy now. Hugh doubted he could have successfully ascended the pass when he'd first arrived at Skyhold. He'd hardly been out of shape then. He'd spent years wandering the alpine woods of Emblem, but the pass was steep as a staircase and the ground largely unstable, crumbling. Hugh and the others found themselves scrambling up on all fours as often as not. Godric and Archer had a particularly difficult time of it, given their greater weight, the shale crumbled far more easily between them. They used their magic to help stabilize it, but Godric ran out partway up, and Archer was reluctant to let his mana reservoirs get too low. And I love when they're like, what is your deal, Talia? How come this is so easy? And she's like, I grew up in the mountains, so I'm much more used to all of this. Plus, I'm not carrying around a bunch of like extra muscle for no reason. And they both basically give her the finger, which is pretty fun. So let's see. She's wearing a bandana over her scalp, by the way, which, like, apart from hiding her head, is just good. When you first cut your hair, it is crazy how cold you feel all the time when you're used to having long hair. That was something that when I cut my hair off, I was always wearing scarves because the back of my neck was freezing all the time. And also, if you're out in the sun, you get scalp burns. And that's not a thing I was ever prepared for either. So let's see. After only a few minutes of rest, Alustin had them up and moving. And they take some measurements, but it becomes pretty clear this isn't the place they want. Hugh sees a sphinx. And we find out that they're like pretty secretive and have been he is smaller, like, of course, than Candoron. I think Alustin says that she's the biggest sphinx he has ever even heard of. Nobody has ever come close, and she's definitely like older than all of them. And when he tells Candoron about this later, he uses the book to communicate with her, and it works. she is very pleased by it because she's thinking that maybe this means the Sphinxes are being like a little bit more willing to show themselves, and that means perhaps they're feeling more secure in their numbers and whatnot. So that's cool. And there's a moment here. No one knew whether Sphinxes gave live birth or laid eggs. Sphinxes were notoriously secret about many parts of their life. Though reflecting on a conversation Hugh once had with Candoron, he suspected that part of it might be embarrassment on the part of the Sphinxes rather than them just being secretive. I don't remember what he's referencing. If that's not meant to be something that I remember, don't remind me. But if I should remember, go ahead. Dan says when Candoron talked to him about contraceptives. Oh, so he's assuming that I thought he meant embarrassment because of the way that they lay or have children, but he just means regarding the entire topic. I see. Okay. Gotcha. So yeah, he talks to Candoron and we find out something wild here. Rhodes Sharax, Hugh's old bully, had gotten into an argument with his master Aiden Dragonslayer that escalated to a battle that had leveled a good part of the Skyhold docks. Shockingly, Rhodes had actually fought his master to a standstill before escaping into the Skyreach range. Nobody had seen him since, though most suspected he was returning to Highvale. Candoron, however, wasn't so sure, and she warned Hugh to be cautious, as there was no telling what Rhodes' intentions towards Hugh might be. Hugh, however, found that rather than being scared or apprehensive, he was just thoughtful. He was fairly sure he knew exactly why Rhodes and Aiden had argued and then fought, and he was sure that wherever Rhodes was going, it wasn't after him. So I'm assuming he thinks the fight is about Rhodes bailing on him and like abandoning him, and that he told Rhodes that it was like all being influenced and Rhodes maybe trying to make excuses for himself and Aiden not having it. But yeah, I am really interested in Rhodes running away. Like what is it that he's trying to do? I am super curious. So this whole thing with Rhodes, it's been a real weird arc. That's been kind of a subplot, you know? So yeah, that is the end of chapter 15, is Hugh having this little chat with Candoron. He closes the book and he thinks about how that's the longest conversation he'd ever had that wasn't a lecture or lesson with Candoron. So yeah. But just really, guys, the Silent Straits are going to distract me forever. I just really want to know what the fuck. Are we ever going to find out what the fuck? Like, what is that? Just very distracted. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you guys again so much for hanging out with me. Thank you to Dan for commissioning this and for hanging out with me in the chat. Appreciate you a lot, man. And I will see you guys on Thursday with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.